Hi, this is Tony Ruggiero, the Dew Sweeper. You're listening to the Tour Coach Podcast, giving you insights into golf instruction at the highest level, from on the PGA Tour to our learning center at Frederica Golf Club. So here I am sitting in on the Tour Coach, and one of the things that I like to do, as most people know, is I like to, not only the people I work with and see out on tour or that I work with teaching, but other teachers that I watch and that I follow through social media or just meeting through acquaintances. And then this is one of those teachers that I wanted to shed some light on because he's been doing a great job up north. He's got some cool stuff out on the internet. Fellow Italian, Rick Silva. Rick, what you doing, bud?
Well, I'm talking to you.
How about that, huh? Modern technology, things we can do with a cell phone, right? But, you know, there's so much information out there, you know. And one of the things I wanted to talk with you about is my dog Chip Shot's going nuts behind me here at the house. But first day home in a while.
Your dog is named Chip Shot?
Yeah. He's part Border Collie, part Yorkie. He's a legend. In fact, he normally rides with me in the car down to the Keys. He's a pretty good dog. But talk a little bit about you and what you do up there in Chicago and your philosophy and kind of how you've gotten where you are.
Wow, that's a mouthful. Okay. Well,
you don't have to do it all at once.
So I guess maybe I'll just start like where I am and maybe try to work backwards, right? So I have pretty cool, like high-end biomechanics lab, so to speak, where, you know, we look at, you know, the science of kind of like what's going on, you know, from kind of a very high-tech level, and then integrate that into the practical, how that golfer can integrate it. Yep. And then start dealing with the person, I guess is the best way that I could describe that. So, you know, when I start looking at somebody, essentially, you know, I don't know them from, you know, Joe or Bob or Adam or Sue, you know, I essentially look at them and, okay, here, what are your goals and things of that nature? And I'm going to start this by saying, well, you know, how do you want this delivered to you? Do you want the science of this, or do you want the practical? And that essentially starts giving me a fairly good roadmap to how somebody wants to receive this information and also maybe how they should receive the information.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and that's one of the things I was interested in and have followed you because I've recently opened an indoor teaching, training, fitting facility in Mobile and kind of spending more time at home. And it's interesting. I do a lot of stuff, as you know, with like Dr. Scott Lynn and with Colby Touye and Morgan Hale, who works for me here in Mobile. And I've been fascinated by the blending of the different sciences and the different, you know, disciplines to how you can bring them together to help somebody play better golf and do it without making it complicated. And I think when I started this journey a while back, I think everybody shied away from science. So like you had the people that were super smart and they talked in riddles, and then you had the people that were just old school and didn't do anything with science. But to me, it seems like we're heading down a road now where the most effective coaches and the most effective teachers out there blend all of it together.
I'd agree with you. You know, and I think there's some interesting unpacking that goes with that. And you know, this is difficult, right? And this is not with any intent whatsoever to offend or anything of that nature at all. You know, and
you getting ready to piss somebody off?
Man, I'm trying not to. That's not where this is trying to go. But it's, you know, when somebody, it's a blend on both sides. It's like, well, if you can't explain something simple, well, then you don't know it deep enough. Well, I don't know if that's entirely true, right? And it's, but you know, how do I want to word this? It's, if somebody's completely avoiding something, why? You know, and I think this business that, I mean, I know that you love it and I love it too, and it's most of it for me. It's just helping people achieve something that they're so impassioned about. It's my life's work. You know what I mean? And you know, people aren't stupid, and the people that we work with, they're not dumb, and I don't understand why we have to dumb it down for them. I think that says more about us on this side of the aisle. Like, why why are we dumbing it down for those people, right? So, 1 + 1 = 2, so why are we trying to make it 4 in an effort to be more simple? I think we essentially make it more complicated trying to dumb it down.
Yeah. And I don't disagree at all. I mean, I think our job, I taught last weekend with Phil Harmon. Billy came to
very cool
work with us, and I mean, he's a legend. And he said something to me in a text afterwards that he's like, in the end, our job is to help the person, guy, woman, kid, whatever, standing in front of us, right?
Yes,
and
sir.
It really doesn't matter how we do it. Now, I think that, one thing I've learned is that I think almost that everybody that's good at what we do, their stuff is pretty correct. Like, they may say it different, use different ways of doing it, and talk different, but I think that I don't know that there's necessarily somebody out there that's making a bunch of people way better, and whatever they're telling us, like, scientifically bogus, But I agree. But I also think you've got to be able to communicate to the level of your student. Like, we all have, like, I remember I taught this guy for years. He was an engineer. Well, like, you had to be really in-depth communicate it to him, right? But then, I taught this guy that was a guitar player. Well, like, he really didn't care. He just wanted to see the shape of the shot and know how to hit it. So I think that's kind of I think that's the art of what we do, is that you have to help the individual that's right there in front of you.
Amen to that. Yep.
But the biomechanics, and that's, what are you finding through your stuff? Are you finding, I'm always fascinated about, I started doing stuff with Scott and with swing catalysts and different things because I had people getting better and I had people saying that I wasn't very scientific. So I kind of wanted to know why people were getting better, right? And so that's why I started involving other people. So I'm always fascinated, like, when you started getting more into the biomechanics, what did you find out? Did you change some of your thoughts on teaching, or did it just reconfirm stuff you were doing? What did it do?
Both. It's both sides of that. There's things that, on a dime that I'll just, like, metaphorically, like, just wad up that piece of paper and go, okay, next, and then there's stuff that I'm like, oh, cool. And then there's stuff kind of blended in, in the middle of that. Here's I guess one example. When you look at, like, two big body masses, okay, so the rib cage, or the upper body mass, all right, and then you got your pelvic mass, body center mass sits in the middle, like, okay, duh. In talking about, like, firing the lower body kind of thing. Well, everyday life, in an effort to be practical and somewhat oversimplify something, okay? You get out of bed in the morning and you go make coffee and maybe walk down the stairs, walk up the stairs. And I think it's, again, oversimplifying something. It's your job on a very unconscious level to organize yourself, to balance yourself, things of that nature, so your ass doesn't fall over, right? So you're balancing those things. Okay, you're organizing. I use that word, organizing those masses. Okay, well, I can't think of anything in any practical situation where, Junior, e.g. the pelvis, fire out from underneath Big Papa. I just doesn't play. So, for generations, we were taught, like, hey, like, the lower body should actually start, like, firing pretty hard. Well, no, there has to be some stabilizing effect there, or cage has to, start to migrate on top of that pelvis to some degree to lend some stabilizing support here. Does that make sense where I'm going with that?
Yeah, no. And I think that in my teaching, one of the things I've learned, or not learned, that I've figured out for me is that a lot of times when those things aren't working, for me, like, sometimes those people are trying to do things that they physically can't do, right? Or, like you talked about stability. I'm big on stability. Like, if your lower body and whatever side you're talking about, whether it's turning into your right side or going into your left, if it's not stable enough or strong enough to withstand what's going on, I mean, you're not going to do it very effectively.
Sure.
Because your body's never going to put itself in a position to hurt itself, or it won't very often. It may if you're drunk and dumb, but generally speaking, in a golf swing, it's not. And so, yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think stability is what you're talking about there is an overlooked thing. People talk about firing different things and all that. And, you've got to be able to, there's got to be stability.
Sure. Another one would be, things that kind of throwing out there or reworking in your mind. The golf world historically is interchanged from time to time, pelvis versus hips. Well, hip joints are an entirely different thing than the pelvis, as itself. The impassioned golfer, looking things up on the internet or, talking to a teaching professional. I think those things are very confusing in that person's mind. So helping that person understanding that better and understanding the function within those two areas play a huge beneficial role to the end golfer. So somebody who may think that they're not very stable or doesn't have enough range of motion finds an entirely different, range, for lack of a better term, again, entirely different, functionality there when they start understanding that they can actually move within that given joint complex. So I think that's very beneficial.
One of the things you touched on as well is that I think that, and this isn't like meant to piss anybody off, right? But like, I think a lot of teachers just assume the student in front of them like already knows what they're talking about, or they assume that it's above the student's head. And I don't know that it matters like what level you bring it at, like how boiled down and basic you make it. But I think, my old mentor, Hank Johnson, used to think, like first lesson, lay out the things you're looking for and the things that you think are important and that kind of need to happen to hit a good golf shot. And it always surprises me how many people come to you for a first lesson. It doesn't really matter handicap. It could be like some guys too that are like pretty good players, and they've taken a bunch of lessons. And then when you still see kind of explain the things that kind of have to happen, how little they've been told or understand it. They've just been told to do things, but maybe never really understood why they were trying to make those changes. And I think it's hard long-term to get people to really make changes if they don't understand what the purpose and why the hell they're doing it.
Absolutely. I think a person at any level with anything has to have buy-in, period.
Mm-hmm. And that's where I think your biomechanics and like you're talking about the lab, I think like or peeling back the onion is such a value. And a student can take as much or as little of that as they want. But explaining to them what needs to happen and what's going on, I think is an incredibly valuable tool because I think too many folks aren't educated on what's going on and they're just told tips or Band-Aids versus really understanding what has to happen.
I completely agree. Like, what is the biggest thing that I think that you have seen that has no ability border, like things that you see with a 10 handicapper that also parallels, a plus index guy or gal, things that have kind of blown your mind in the last, let's say, 10 years, that
things that they both do,
things that were misconceptions.
Oh, well, that's a good question. There's all the basics, the things you've heard of, like, but people that are really trying to, like, not let their head move is one, those types, and there's a lot of misconceptions between, like, you have people that have been told to get behind the ball and they just slide all their weight over there. And it surprises me. Like I taught a gentleman the other day he's from Mississippi. He's a pretty good player. Doesn't play an incredibly long golf course, but plays, but he's a good player. He's like a 3. But like, he'd been told for years he had to get all behind it and get his weight or, or pressure or whatever. He said weight because first time he'd been on anything. And, how much lateral movement he had over there. And he had lateral movement going through. There was no rotary motion. And, he was a little bit, not big. It was like 6 foot, but like not a small guy. But like he couldn't hit it anywhere, right? But he's like, well, I've been being told to get my weight behind it, my weight through, right?
Sure.
And, that's, I've been just thinking off the top of my head, things like that. You see people that, well, that's where a person to me is told something but not explained it to what has to happen, right? And that there's a difference between pressure and then all your weight going over there.
Totally makes sense. Do you think that, like, the better player just, by the masses, let's say, kind of just because they're a better player, and I'm air quoting here, e.g. a better athlete, they kind of, fake it till you make it or default their way into, like, those better positions?
I think better athletes do. I think better athletes figure things out, how to use their body in the ground and those different things better, because I think there's similarities between other sports.
Yeah.
Like, to me, one of the hardest people to teach, like two people, they're different. Like, both successful people, but one guy really has never played sports, super nice guy, but not a good athlete at all. Like, to me, he's much more difficult than the guy that might even be a little older, not quite as flexible, but like played a bunch of sports and was like, was a college athlete. Like, to me, those guys or those girls or whoever pick it up. And one of the interesting things for me in my teaching, obviously I spend a lot of time with junior golfers, but there's a trend of these really good young players they're going to maybe smaller schools, Rick, like a Division I school, but not like Duke, right? But they played 3 or 4 other sports at high levels coming up, and then they picked golf up kind of middle of high school and became good enough to play at a small college. But to me, it's interesting watching them, how they get better way quicker, and to me, their ceiling is pretty high because they're such good athletes. That's just a trend I've seen. It's interesting watching. I think the athletic ability and the relationship between other sports, I think it makes it easier to learn.
I 100% agree. 100% agree.
What do you find in your, I'm going to call it air quote here, lab, your biomechanics lab, but what do you find when you if you took somebody that was 40 years old, hadn't played much sports, but was, say they're a 10 handicap, and then you took a 40-year-old that played a lot of sports, was also a 10 handicap, would you find a lot of stuff different? Or? Yeah,
so I completely understand I believe I do anyway, understand where you're going with that. And let's remove the quasi, subjectivity of the individual and things of all that nature, right? The athlete, I think the athlete will always win, and I know a great pal of both of ours, Mr. Matt Rudy, but he and I have had this discussion for years, and it's a topic that he and I both agree on, a topic that drives him nuts is like the Hogan argument, like if a Hogan would play in this era, and it's like, listen, man, like the athlete is always going to win.
Right.
Always, always, always. Right. And it's like one of my most favorite, just sidebar coming back to that, if you were to go sit in a game at Old Yankee Stadium before they tore it down, or one of my most favorite places in the world where I go almost every night, Wrigley Field at 1060 West Addison, before they, expanded the seats. So the seats are so small because like the average American back then was like 5'6", and so, and if you look at that person, that athlete on the field today, they're huge. So the athlete's always going to win. So back to your question, to your point, that athlete's going to dominate versus somebody who's not. Just give them a small little incubational period, they're going to win. So what do I see and how do I get the non-athlete who hasn't had like a historical presence there to compete with that person? Well, stuff that I'm really intrigued about right now, stuff that's been very vague in our business to this point, is if you go back to like the old golf school days and like GPA, grip posture alignment, that stuff has been very, very, very vague, and how it's been taught. Nothing against that. It was people have done the best of their ability with the time frame that they existed in, and they did it really, really well. But we know more. And then the people who are going to come after us, they're going to look at us and go, those freaking idiots. And that's so cool. And I hope that you and I are sitting somewhere and we're decrepit and we're drinking something great and we can laugh at ourselves. I really do. So, honing in on that, and then how do I make that? Well, the detailed stuff about how the structure of the anatomy of how we grasp something that's outside of our body's mass, and wheel it around to create leverage, that's important. How we get them to control the biggest body mass that we have, that's really important to getting that person who doesn't have an athletic historical background to compete with the athlete. That's important. So those two things.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing, or to me it's interesting, is when I talk to great teachers like yourself that maybe, I think all of us, and there's a few out there I'm not crazy about, but we're not going to get, that's another podcast, but might be more interesting. But, I think we're all trying to get at the same thing, and we come at it from different angles and angles that we're better at, right? And that's why I brought the athlete stuff up, like the work I've done with Colby and those types of things. Yeah. I've found that like doing some of those exercises and using bands or things away from a golf club have helped a 15 handicapper that isn't a good athlete figure out how to move the club around them better. Right? Those types of things. And that's why I like picking people like yourselves, brain. I like to see what you see with those things, right? Because I'm in my own little world and doing my own deal, and then it's easy also to become myopic where you get doing your same thing and it works, but you like to see what else is out there, what other ways people get to the same end result, because the more tools we have and the more information we have, the better, more effective we are.
For sure. 100%.
Yeah.
I think it's just fascinating, even if it's somebody who, like to your point, like who I'm not crazy about. I can honestly say that even if I don't necessarily jive with somebody, which I try really hard at this age to kind of jive with most people, I try to.
Yeah.
Man, there is not too many people who are like at a certain level that I don't take something incredibly valuable away from that interaction. And when I mean valuable, I mean like put it right into the bank that I'm probably going to use, in the near future.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what's cool about some of these podcasts. When I got into doing this, I didn't necessarily know I'd like it or whatever, but just talking to people, and it's fun to talk to, like, it's fun to talk with some of the greats, and I've had some of the legends on, but it's also fun to talk to people that are up and coming, that are doing a hell of a job, that have ideas different than you, because you can learn something, and also you can expose more people to it, which is kind of the idea of what we're doing here. I think you're doing a hell of a job up there. You got some great ideas. You're passionate about it, which is key. And so it was fun. I wanted to have the opportunity to sit you down, but look forward to hopefully getting up there sometime, spending some time up there with you and learn more about what you do. But I think the stuff we talk about is going to help some teachers and some players out there.
Man, that'd be honored. That'd be awesome. And I hope so.
And let everybody know real quick where to find you. You got lots of great stuff out there on social media as well.
Yeah, thanks. So the Insta handle is movement, 3 golf, website, movement3golf.com. And, all my information's there. So
perfect.
Absolutely. Yep.
Rick, it's awesome. I've enjoyed the opportunity to talk with you some and get to know you over the last couple of years, and especially through Matt. But you're doing a great job. It's fun to spend time and learn with you, and have fun in this lesson. And I'll look forward to, we'll catch up soon.
Thank you, Pro.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Tour Coach with Tony Ruggiero. If you enjoyed this, make sure to hit subscribe, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you are listening to this podcast. You can stay up to date because we have weekly episodes coming your way with fascinating people in the world of golf instruction at the highest level. Make sure to subscribe and stay tuned. If you want to learn more about Tony, head over to dosweepersgolf.com to get all the details on what he's up to. Maybe you want to see him, grab a lesson, or go to one of his camps, pick up his book, Lessons from the Legends. You can do that there. If you want to see Tony in action with some videos and other content, head over to golfsciencelab.com/Tony to get more info there. This episode was powered by the Golf Science Lab and was edited, mixed, and produced by Just Hit Publish Productions.
We go into year 2 of the Tour Coach. It wouldn't be possible without the support of all our sponsors. And I've had some great ones. And one of the things that I'm most proud of in my career and in my business is the fact that all of my relationships here and all these sponsorships have been long-time, long-withstanding relationships, haven't jumped from sponsor to sponsor and manufacturer to manufacturer. And I've always prided ourselves in special relationships and when people work together, support each other, and we've all put out great products for the benefits of everybody else. So I want to give a special thanks to these folks that have been with me for such a long time, and that would be the folks at Srixon, Cleveland Golf, and Zexio. Couldn't ask for a better manufacturer to be aligned with. And not only do they put out great product and great support, but they're first-class people, and they believe in what we're doing here on the Tour Coach and with the Dew Sweepers, and also Vineyard Vines. Ian, Shep, TJ, and all the folks at Vineyard Vines. It's hard to keep me looking good, but they do a fantastic job. And they're like family. They support everything on the Dew Sweepers, and we're so proud to be affiliated with and support the folks at Vineyard Vines. So if you're out there, you're listening to the Tour Coach, please support our sponsors, Srixon, Cleveland Golf, Zexio, as well as Vineyard Vines, and keep listening and keep enjoying hanging out with us here on the Tour Coach.